Hatred, Slavery's Inevitable Aftermath. Oscar Wilde. The history of the African slave trade into the Americas is well documented and talked about, yet there is one subject that goes ignored: the Irish slave trade. Ignored in the American educational curriculum today. The Irish slave trade began when James II sold 30,000 Irish prisoners as slaves to the New World and the West Indies. By the mid-1600s, the Irish were the main slaves sold to Antigua and Montserrat. 70% of the total population of Montserrat were Irish slaves. Ireland quickly became the biggest source of human slaves. It may be hard to think of the Irish as slaves, but the evidence doesn't lie. During the 1650s, over 100,000 Irish children between the ages of 10 and 14 were taken from their parents and sold as slaves in the West Indies, Virginia and New England. In this decade, 52,000 Irish, mostly women and children, were sold to Barbados and Virginia. Another 30,000 Irish men and women were also transported and sold to the highest bidder. In 1656, Oliver Cromwell ordered that 2,000 Irish children be taken to Jamaica and sold as slaves to English settlers. The Irish were further exploited when the British began to breed Irish women or girls, sometimes as young as 12, with African males. This is why so many African people have Irish last names. It wasn't just Cromwell. Indeed, Irish slavery predates Cromwell. In fact, one of the first Europeans in America were Irish slaves. If Queen Elizabeth I had lived in the 20th century, she would have been viewed with the same horror as Hitler and Stalin. After the Battle of Kinsale, at the beginning of the 17th century, 30,000 Irish slaves were sold. In the 12-year period, during and following the Confederation Revolt, from 1641 to 1652, over 550,000 Irish were killed by the English, and 300,000 were sold as slaves. As the Irish population of Ireland fell from 1,466,000 to 616,000, in 1650 25,000 slaves were sold to Flanders and St. Kitts. 12,000 Irish slaves were sold in Barbados by Cromwell during his genocide. During the Irish slave trade in America, the Irish slaves were worth £5 and African slaves £50. The Irish and African slaves were housed together, but the Irish slaves were treated much worse. Indeed, African slaves were newcomers. The Irish had been enslaved in America long before the Africans were sent to America. If an Irish slave did anything their master didn't like, they were tied up and set on fire. Indeed, if you go to the West Indies, many peoples whose ancestors were Irish slaves can speak Gaelic. In 1839, a bill was passed by the British government forbidding you from owning or selling Irish people as slaves or enslaving them, bringing an end to Irish misery. Well, for a short while anyway. In total, the amount of Irish people enslaved adds up to about 582,000 Irish slaves. Thanks for watching.
Now, how did the family come to Montserrat, Mr. Allen?
Well, the Irish people came to Montserrat on account of Cromwell.